Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to another round of the Essential Leadership Cycle podcast. I'm your host and intentional leader, Rob Fisher. And today we have Ricky Kalmon with us. Now, Ricky is a mindset expert. He's also a motivational speaker. I think he motivates just by the way he speaks. So to call him a motivational speaker is almost a disservice to what he really does. He's written a book that I think is fantastic called Leveraging Your Mindset, Overcome Limiting Beliefs and Amplify Your Life. And so I want to introduce you guys to Ricky Kalmon. Ricky, do you want to introduce yourself to our listeners, and we'll get started.
Rob, it's great to see you. Thank you so much. I love what I do because I get a chance to meet people, and not only the people that hear me speak, but I get to share stages with extremely talented people like as yourself. And I was thrilled to be able to connect with you at a live event. Thanks for having me on your show. I hope we create some intentional leadership today.
Yeah, I do as well. And for those of you who don't know, Ricky and I met actually. We were co-speaking at an event and hadn't met each other before. I think we both kind of looked each other up on the internet beforehand to see what we were getting into with the order of speaking. And I had to turn around and leave immediately and fly down to New Zealand. But Ricky stayed with the group, and I was just amazed at the way our two programs, in complete absence of knowing one another, when you're doing the right thing, then synergy appears. And if you're not doing the right thing, you're always trying to make a constant fit. So can you talk a little bit about that and your experience with that and how?
Absolutely. Well, I'm gonna piggyback on what you just said too. I'm actually humbled and actually thrilled when a client books speakers with such synergy, because then it validates again the importance a client has on making people better and investing in their team, in the human factor. And they obviously did their homework to see how much we complemented each other and we weren't a conflict and we weren't repeating the same information. I think that's a testament to how companies are stepping up to realizing mindset, mental conditioning, training goes beyond the physical ability of people, their skill set and their knowledge, but how to improve that by the mental conditioning. And that's where I'm going to say this to people listening. You're investing in people. These type of programs are not an expense because you save people money to be more
Right.
efficient. I help people become more efficient by engraving that software. So I didn't answer your question off the bat, and I already lost track. What was your question? Sorry, I was so excited about the fact that we've connected.
Well, I think you did answer it because we connected as a result of seeing some immediate true synergies. I know that word gets used a lot, probably overused, but we just had a lot of overlap, and the integration of the two sets of concepts is virtually seamless. Uh,
Hmm.
you provide people individual methods for, I mean, it's the title of the book, for crying out loud, leveraging their mind. And then what we do is go the step-by-step method for organizations to turn that into operational excellence. So those two things, absent one another, work very well. But I mean, I think what we saw when we met was that there's just some real integration of the two sets of concepts that you would get more than, if you added two and two together, you get way more than four.
Well, it's funny. I have not heard this statement, in years until like I think the last year I hear more people say, and I don't know if it's just a pickup or it's just used more often now. I don't know what I don't know. It's and I don't. And when I first heard that, I was like, I heard an executive say that to me. I don't know what I don't know. I'm like, I've never heard anybody say something like that in the way they said it. But I think it's an acknowledgement of how unaware are we of being unaware?
Well, and so if you don't teach people how to be aware of when they're unaware, then they don't know. So,
Correct.
the kind of use goes back to the first Gulf War. A Secretary of Defense used that, but even in the book, or in the way we teach knowledge-based performance mode, it's when you don't know what you don't know. But then we follow that with, if you don't know what you don't know, how do you know? And that
Right.
is you have to have triggers to tell you that you're vulnerable. And so all those things connect together. I mean, when I read your book, all I saw throughout there, not all I saw, but I saw throughout there these triggers that you gave about both changing your mindset and making that mindset change more permanent. In other words, I think you call it rewriting the software,
Hmm.
or editing the software. And that's exactly what we need to do. So the first thing is to acknowledge in a leader that they don't know what they don't know. The second thing is to for them to recognize that vulnerability.
And you show people those triggers. You show people how, that they have triggers. And by the way, if you have them, you also have to use another trigger to implement the new change.
Exactly.
I think this goes hand in hand. I mean, you and I have talked about this before, that this is um, this is not just somebody in the physical side of their careers. This is also in the leadership. This is also in the sales. This is about the communication side. This is about employee engagement. Again, in life, isn't it fair to say that after our educational years, whether it's high school, and if we decide to go off to undergrad or even grad, we might be required later in life by our jobs to take retraining to learn how to use a piece of equipment or learn how to use a skill set. But I think that we forget the importance of retraining our brain.
Uh, yeah, and I don't know whether we naturally want to do that or not. So I don't know whether we forget or whether it's just not part of our mental pattern, not part of our mindset that we should continually retrain our brain. And then that then becomes part of our search, our mindset for searching, instead of just trying to remember, oh yeah, um, this is retraining my brain. Because even when we go to refresher training, I don't, in years past, my nuclear background, I didn't consider that retraining my brain until I read your book and you talked about that.
Well, when you're in high school, go back for a second. You're a senior in high school. What's on your mind?
I don't want to talk about that on this podcast.
All right. Is it fair to say maybe 7 out of the 10 people listening to this podcast right now, their mindset is, I just want to get out of high school, right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And when you ask
Now,
about college, it's like, I don't know about that. Let me just get out of high school first.
okay, now you're a senior in high school. Now you're a senior in college. What do you want to do?
Just get out of college.
Right. Why do we want to get out? Because we already think that we've got everything we need and we don't need any more. And by the way, this is part of our culture to get an education, to get a degree. It's a standard of our culture. It's part of our society. It's part of the human race. We've programmed ourselves to educate ourselves to a certain level so we can go out in the real world and figure things out by ourselves. And then during that time, okay, by the way, we have a new way. You're going to have to retrain. You got to get recertified because this is part of our procedure. This is part of what we do. But in some ways, I think that, and that's okay here. I'm not pointing out people that of their faults. I'm pointing out that self-discovery never ends. And we are all, and I figured this out. It took me a little longer in life now that I have kids. We learn every day. And if
Right.
you learn that we're all students of life itself, and you're always learning, then you give yourself an opportunity to become a better significant other, a
Right.
significant friend, a parent, an aunt, an uncle, a grandparent. That's your personal life. Now think about how you apply that into your business and how you affect the culture, your leadership.
Right. And and I think that there needs to be some intentionality to that,
That's
because
that's
it would be if we're not intentional about it, it gets put in the background thoughts like everything else, and we lose another day of not learning.
hmm,
But if you establish those habits, like you talked about in your book, of just, you know, these are the things that I need to do each day that set me up for the potential to learn. That is a different way of approaching things. That's actually people learning how to be an intentional and long-term learner, as opposed to people just thinking that it's going to happen automatically because I like to learn.
Well, and there are people that like to learn, but there are also people that can't handle rejection
Right.
or criticism. And they look at criticism as failure. And their brain, and that's okay. I'm acknowledging it's all right. Their brain has just been wired to assume that if I'm being criticized, it's my fault and I'm to blame. And they don't look at criticism as an opportunity. And I think the criticism, an opportunity to look for somebody else to point out something you just maybe weren't aware of, and that opportunity is to become better. And again, I'm not being carefree here, but I want to talk to the leader here, and I want to talk to the individual, coworker or sales individual or plant foreman or whoever it may be. That I think that when we acknowledge our programming, that can be outdated. It has served us at some point, but our internal programming, like our phones, like our desktops, like our laptops, like our tablets, need continual updates.
And I think that that's more true today, as fast as technology and the world is moving, than it may have ever been. I look at our ancestors and how they could have learned things over long periods of time. I mean, look at what we're doing right now. We've developed this as a mechanism for conveying good information to people. In 2 years, you and I have gotten really good at this. And
Yeah.
that required us to think, certainly required me to think differently, because I was not very technologically savvy until I figured out that I had to do that. I had to learn that. And in the essential leadership cycle, what we keep talking about is self and team awareness. We have to be self-aware before we can be motivated to change. And the same goes for our team. We have to be aware of our team and our team members and what their capabilities and capacities are, what their proclivities are, before we can try to institute change in some kind of global way when that's not going to work with a team. And you talk a little bit about that. So I'd like to kind of throw you a curveball and talk about the fact that you need to understand this from a team perspective as a leader as well.
Well, I think it's twofold. I think that when you lead within, you lead yourself better, but when you lead within, others will follow. And you make a great example. There's a difference between, I think I've said this before. Great leaders make great leaders. I mean, really great leaders understand not only their leadership role as a leader, but also as a listener,
And
and
I
to
think
help
we
people.
remember, sorry to interrupt, I think we remember all of those. So I
Sure,
didn't
we
mean
do.
to interrupt you, but
No,
that
no, I totally agree. I totally agree. I think when you have the mindset that your job not only as a leader to be, it's interesting. When we think of a leader, do we think of somebody as a leader at the top, or we look at them as an advisor? Are we looking at them as a coach? Are we looking at them as an instructor? Are we looking at them as is where the fault goes? I think it's up to the individual itself.
right.
But I also think that the leaders that you and I that you just acknowledged, that the ones we remember not only are steadfast as their role as the leader, as the responsible party of the down chain, the downline, but how they cultivate and train people. Because every great leader I've ever talked to always says, I am replaceable. Somebody else needs to take this spot eventually. I can't stay here forever.
Right.
So my job not only is as a leader is to make make opportunities for somebody to replace me one day.
I also think that some of the great leaders that we remember from our life, none of them were perfect, nor did they try to be, but they knew what to do when they were imperfect. When they made a mistake, they did what we consider to be the right thing with that. And I think that is a leader mindset that
It's intentional.
needs attention. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's not, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but that's intentional.
Yeah.
It's intentional to, okay, here's the problem. We don't need to repeat the problem twice. We know the
Right.
problem. Now let's find the solution. Try to apply that. If you're listening right now, the next time somebody says, we have a problem, or you say you have a problem, think about and be conscious. Sit in the audience and listen how many times the problem is repeated. To be honest with you, if it's said more than twice, you're wasting too much time on it. You've acknowledged it, you've identified it, you've clearly said this is the problem. Your mind understands that, but we get in the habit of continually repeating it. It's no different from the news, the politics, the environment, the economy. Fine. What's the solution for me at this moment? What does my brain is craving a pivot. Not to overuse that word, but because we say it a lot now. But
Right.
the brain really does want the solution. It wants the alternatives. It gets excited about it because when you have the solution, then there's a new way of looking at it and then there's new success. And we all love success. That chemical reaction that happens between our in our ears of when we fulfill something, we do it better, we're more successful, we're more profitable, we're more efficient. That's a feeling you can't bank. That's a feeling that just happens. And I think it's important to realize that, not to go off tangent, that we have the ability, just we need to be able to reset and redirect.
Yeah, that's a great point, because that reset and redirect has to be done with intentionality. It doesn't happen on its own. So when we keep, as you said, repeating the problem and not seeking a solution, that's our brain doing what it naturally does. It defaults to the problem. But we do want to seek that symptom, that solution. And in order to do that, we have to do that with intentionality. We can't just, that's not going to happen on its own. And again, I think great leaders do that. And it's so intentional that you can see it. And then we can
Absolutely.
make that behavior. I think that's another thing that we have in common, you and the way that you wrote your book and how to do that on an individual level, and us and how we teach organizations. Here's how you do that, not just what to do. And I think that's a big problem in our industry, is that you have a lot of speakers and a lot of book writers out there that tell a whole bunch of whats, but they don't go that extra step like you did in your book. And we try to do in our training, and tell them the hows, that if you do these hows, if you use these methods, then you're going to get the outcomes. But if you just know the what, then your brain is just going to default to the way it normally does. You're not going to rewire that software.
All right. Can we role play for a second?
Sure.
All right. Total role play here. Come to me right now. Tell me how stressed out you are. I want you to think about the most stressful situation. Make one up right now. You're stressed out. You're stressed out. Come to me right now. Tell me how stressed out you are.
I mean, I'm massively stressed because I've got this thing that's going on that is dividing all of my time. And I don't know whether I'm doing the right thing for the business or for the family. And it's just dominates my brain and completely stressing me out, so that
I mean, are
I'm
you stressed out? Are you really stressed out now?
super stressed out. Can't
Super
even.
stressed out. Okay. Common mistake people make, I feel. I mean, you can disagree with me. Rob, you just need to relax. Rob, you just need to relax, Rob. Rob, just relax. Just relax. Hey, would you relax? Hey, lighten up. Relax.
Well,
How
people
often in our life
hear
have we
that
ever
too,
heard
though.
those statements? What? You
I
got
mean,
cut
that's
out. What just
a statement for a lot of people, right? People
You got
just,
cut out one more time. You got to repeat that one more time on my end.
yeah, sorry. People just say, just relax. Other people say, don't tell me to just relax. That's actually a trigger phrase for them to stress them out more.
That's right. And what is that? That is a statement. It's a command. It's literally a command to relax. It's not direction.
Right.
It's not a solution. It's an acknowledgement. Okay, I know you're stressed, so you just need to relax. It's a command, not a direction. Now, let's just take this one step farther. Again, this is just a role play. You've just said that same thing. I'm not going to have you repeat it. I know how stressed you are. Hey, Rob, with me just for a second. Just humor me. Let's just role play. And I want you, and I would say those words. Just hear me out. Work with me for a second. Take a breath with me. Let's do it, Rob. Just go ahead and do it now. Be present for a moment. Rob, there's a technique there.
Right.
That's not the command. I asked you to relax. You didn't do anything. I did it with you. It's now a technique. And now, if you're listening, just take a deep breath. That's intentional. That's
And
being present.
I hope
That,
people do that, because what's vitally important about what you just did was when you said relax, it's like telling somebody to be safe. You're demanding an outcome instead of creating a method. So
right.
safety, just like stress, just like relaxation, those are all outcomes. And we keep telling people to have an outcome instead of giving them the process for that outcome. And that deep breath, that we call it a cleansing breath, that really sets your mind into a different place, is a method for managing that stress and a method for starting the relaxation. That's why I love what you do, because it's about giving people the hows instead of just telling them the whats. And that's something that people can learn from you and what you do, and us and what we do. Is in the end, it's not enough to tell people what. You have to give them a how that works.
Right. And now you think about, if we've just slowed down the breathing, we've put aside the distraction, we've acknowledged the stress, it's there. You and I are now present in the moment. We're not thinking about what's causing the stress. We're thinking about our conversation. And now in this conversation, you and I talk about safety. We talk about procedures. We talk about new ways of looking at things with a different perspective. Now it goes beyond us having a conversation. I have your attention. And if I have your attention, you've now given yourself permission. And that's key. When you give yourself permission, you give yourself permission to grow.
That's an amazing transition. And again, because in our world, what we would say is that if I've got all that stress and if I'm focused on the outcome of relaxation, then my brain is now focused on that. It can't focus on anything else. But when I do that breathing and you do it with me, that actually pauses our brain to allow us, neurologically, it allows room for a different thought, as opposed to the thought being dominated. And you used a great word, us being distracted by that thought of relaxation or stress. We now, that cleansing breath allows our brain to have a pocket that can be filled with something that it needs instead of something that it wants.
And I think this applies to everybody. It doesn't make a difference what hat you wear, personally, professionally, up and down the corporate ladder. It doesn't make a difference. And you don't have to be public with it. You can be private. You can be private with your breath. You can be private with your intention. You can have internal conversations with yourself. You don't have to be your worst enemy. You can be your best friend. You don't have to allow your mindset to dominate like it's somebody else in the room. In other words, you don't have to let the negativity, the frustration, the doubt, the fears, the phobias, everything else that goes on in our life become so powerful that you talk about it like it's somebody else standing on your shoulders. You own it. Acknowledge it. Let it become your biggest cheerleader, not your biggest opponent.
That's great advice. And again, it's great advice on how. And so, I'd like to, is there a question that you wish I would have asked you that I didn't?
I think that, when people ask me about, this sounds great, it sounds like a, great perspective. If I don't practice this already, when should I do this? Is this a good thing that for me to start on the weekend? I hear these a lot. I think if you have the intention, you act on it. We make promises to change. We have great intentions. We do. I think everybody has great intentions. I don't think anybody wakes up and says, I'm going to have a bad intention today, and I purposely want to have a bad day. But I think if you acknowledge, like you and I are talking, acknowledge the change, acknowledge growth, acknowledge all these things, and you give yourself permission, you act on it today. And yet we will set reminders on our calendar for appointments, and we hold ourselves accountable to those reminders, not only because if we don't show up, it makes us look bad and we're at fault and we're at blame. We expect the other person to show up. But it's interesting. We don't set a calendar, or maybe you do. I'm just saying, I think the average person, when I talk to them, doesn't actually set a calendar reminder for themselves. And what I'm saying is, if somebody was to ask me what's one of the most powerful takeaways right now, is that if you're getting something out of this conversation, whether it's from Rob's training or from my awareness here, set a calendar reminder for yourself. Hold yourself accountable. Give yourself, make a contract with yourself that at 1 o'clock today, I will spend 15 minutes resetting, redirecting. I will go into one of Rob's videos and retrain my brain to be a better intentional leader, or coworker, or whatever it may be, foreman. I'm going to set an intention today to think about my family for 10 minutes to reset. Maybe at the end of the day, I'm going to leave, because people talk about work-life balance. I don't think there is ever a work-life balance. It's about work-life being present. Be present where you're at. By the way, I'm not perfect. My family will tell me. So they'll tell me to reset with my trigger words. I think that's an important question I think we need to ask ourselves, is how do we focus better?
I think what you said, as you were saying it, I thought of something that I can use and that I hope our listeners can use. And that is that if we intentionally make ourselves as important as we've made other people, then we have a chance that we'll set that alarm for 5 or 10 minutes of self-reflection, or just spending time with and on ourselves. If we don't think ourselves are as important as other people, we'll probably not do that. And that, again, to kind of close this out, is self and team awareness. It's the way the essential leadership cycle starts. It's the way that we can manage ourselves. Being aware of and managing our tendencies is a start for all of those pieces. Ricky, I really appreciate you coming on the podcast. I hope it was good for you as it was for me and my listeners. Again, you should really get Ricky's book, Leverage Your Mindset. It made a difference in my life when I read it. I gave it to my brother, and he's got it right now, or I would hold it up. He took it on. So I
Well,
really on it. And anything else you want to say to our folks?
I'm a big fan of yours, your platform, your content. I think it's extremely valuable that people invest in themselves. I think that's the key takeaway here, is that you and I are providing services in a way that get people to think differently. My motto has always been, change the way you think, you will change your entire world. Thank you for having me on.
Thanks, Ricky. I really appreciate it. And remember, intentional leadership starts with you.